have a look at ranges of mountains that overlap each other and come forward into the picture, getting increasingly stronger in tone. Now, if you remember in the monochrome we did of Lake Garda, we had a similar situation where we had succeeding layers of strengthened mountains as they came forward. Well, we're going to look at that in a little more detail in this tutorial, because what we have here is an evening sunset, and as you can see, the sun set behind the distant mountains, so it's not actually showing, but it's left this red and golden glow in the sky and this slightly misty effect of the mountain ranges in between. Now, the two most common problems I find in this sort of picture are that people paint the far distant mountains too light and they never actually get the subsequent ranges strong enough, so the whole picture looks washed out. Or more often they get this first layer, or one of the early layers, too strong, and they don't leave any strength left in their paint to pick up these stronger layers. Now, I'm using the mop brush for this tutorial, but you could use any of the other brushes, and although I'm using Saunders Waterford 140 pound paper, 300 grams, then you can easily use Bockingford or any other watercolour paper for the exercise. The colours I'm going to use: light red, permanent rose, phthalo blue and raw sienna. And as you can see, I'm using quite a strong, rich mix of raw sienna, and I'm bringing it down to a little bit below the level of where the mountains will start. Notice I'm not making any attempt in this exercise to draw any of the mountains. We don't need to. You can do if you want, if you feel more comfortable, but just try it with the brush alone and you'll soon get very comfortable with that style of painting. Right, now I've picked up the light red. I'm just going to add a little bit of touch of permanent rose to it to give us that warm orangey colour, and before this has a chance to dry, I'm going to take that into the middle of the sky there, like that. But I'm not going to go too far down the page, because what I'm going to do now is to come back into the raw sienna and a little bit of the light red and just take this colour quite lightly down the page. Right, now the next layer I'm going to do is a mix of permanent rose and a little touch of the phthalo blue, and you can see it gives a lovely purple mauve colour, and it's only quite pale. You can see it's quite watery, and that's exactly as I want it, because this is the furthest distant horizon. It's more or less straight, but I'm not going to do it dead straight, but you can see how quite watery it is. Now, I don't want that to finish as a hard edge line, so I'm very gently going to pull this out, because there's only going to be a little touch at the top of this horizon line actually visible. I'm doing that very, very gently. It's another reason that I've used the mop brush, because it is quite gentle. Don't forget, you've got layers of paint on here that if you're too rough with them, you're going to pick those layers of paint up off the paper. It's going to mix with the fresh paint you're putting on, and then you are going to create mud. Right, back with the hairdryer before this creates problems for us. Okay, we've added a little bit more pigment from the permanent rose, the light red and the phthalo blue. Not too strong, it's simply a stronger version of what we've already put on here. And this time I'm just going to again just go in and out, cross over the mountains and perhaps finish off. I don't want to create any tide marks, so you can see I'm not scrubbing at the paint at all, just adding some water to the base just to let it run down like that. Doesn't matter if there's a little bit of a tide mark here, because we'll have that covered with subsequent layers. This time I'm going to use a paper towel just to take the excess off the base, and once again in with the hairdryer. We've got the same strength of paint as we used for this layer here, but because we've faded it out as it comes down so it looks like a misty effect, we can then go in with the same strength of paint. You've got to keep it moving like that. Let's move that up there like that. But you can see where the misty effect has been created as we started to fade the previous layer out. You can see the next layer, the top of the next layer, which is a bit stronger, is going to show up that much better as a light against dark. Now while I'm talking, let's just get rid of this layer here, because you can see already here there's the start of a tide mark, and water-based paints will create tide marks, will create problems for you if you're busy yapping instead of painting, which is a problem I have constantly. Right, a bit stronger and darker this time, but plenty of permanent rose and light red in the mix, because we do want it to come forward, and obviously the warmer colours are going to come forward rather than the cooler versions of this colour. Okay, now that's going to really push those other layers back, but at the same time we really need to add some water in here like that. Right, now don't let anyone tell you that water can't run uphill, because watercolour paints will prove otherwise. That water has started to run upwards slightly before I dried it off with the hairdryer. Right, now although this mix here is much stronger than this mix we put on here originally, you can see that we're by no means having to get towards thick straight out of the tube paint or straight off the palette paint. There's still a fair amount of water in that, even though we've put so far 1, 2, 3, 4 different layers on. So this time we'll go in. Now look at how rich and vibrant that mix is. Right, for the final colour mixes, I've introduced a lot more light red and permanent rose here, and I've also introduced a fair amount of raw sienna. Right, now I'll put that reddy brown mix in I've just described, but as well as that I've added a final layer where I've added a lot more phthalo blue to the same reddy brown mix, and I've put it on wet in wet, and although they've run a little bit, because the two layers are quite strong paint, they've not run as much as it would have done with the watery paint up here, and it's given me a nice effect of foliage, which is just what I want in these nearby foreground layers. You don't see the foliage in the far distant hills. But I hope you try this exercise, because it's a great way to learn how to create tremendous depth into a picture, and at the same time create a lovely evening sky and a lovely warm atmosphere in a very, very simple way.